Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are going to discuss what is heaven. Now, before I get into this, if you are a brand new person, you must understand that my religious beliefs are a little bit different than yours, probably, especially if you're coming to me as a devout religious follower of any kind. But still, the concept of heaven is in most of the minds of those who believe in some sort of ecosystem to death, that when you don't believe in death being the final stage, which I think is logical, and I'll explain that, you start to kind of fantasize about this place. This place in which we sort of want to exist. We do. We want heaven to exist. But the second you try to define it, it starts to seem pretty silly, at least by man's, man's means, right? So I've been mentioning this in several episodes. I beat it up, but I only beat it up for a sentence or two, and then I move on. So finally, I was recording it the other day, and I kept hearing that repeating loop in my mind about heaven and bashing the fact that we can't really come up with a decent definition of it. And then I thought, let's just do it. Let's just make an episode about it, because I'm going to riff, like all my episodes. This is like, I have no idea what I'm exactly going to say past 10 minutes, but it feels like a good meaty subject. Now, again, if you're coming in new, the big thing is that I went down the path of Christianity. I was raised a Catholic. Then I became a scientist. I always believed in God, but more as a, global consciousness when I got into physics and astronomy and cosmology and all this other stuff. And then I got back into Christianity at 18, totally fell for the Bible 100%, got baptized at 19 by choice, lived in it pretty much for 3 years solid, lived with elders of my church, went to church 4 times a week. Then I popped out because of moving and jumped into Egyptology just out on whim, and even studying what I believe to be now to be a very partially true story about the pharaohs and the dynasties of Egypt. The story of the unification of Egypt is one that will rip apart any religion that you've ever believed in, because you will watch the absolute man-made creation of idols and gods, and then watch how they are unified and have their responsibilities hobbled by man. It's one of the most beautiful evolutionary steps, where you get to watch a bunch of gods that have been running the show get marginalized by man. But then I started studying the Roman history. I started studying under a guy named Dr. Atwell. And I went on this journey through writing screenplays and writing books. I went on this, journey to find the evidence of Christ, because I wanted to take those pieces of evidence and put it into my materials. I was pulled aside by the elders of my church, who said, look, Jesus never existed, but it's better that we believe that he did than to have law of the jungle. I was like, whoa, I'm not even ready to hear that, because I still believe he exists. I bumped into several scholars who've gone down that journey too. And of course, you'll bump into people who say they know a guy that was a scientist and was an atheist and supposedly went down the journey to prove against any religion, and then he came out being a complete believer. I have been unable to find those people. So I'm going to come at heaven having no belief in the true existence of Jesus Christ, any of his disciples, Paul. That whole story, I think, was made up. It was the way that Rome maintained control and guilt-tripped people in the name of God, and kept their empire going for basically another 1,000 years when it should have shut down. But we are going to come at it from the traditional Christian perspective, and we're just going to come at it from what could it possibly be, even if it could be anything that you wanted it to be. I'll give you the reign of control. You can be the designer of heaven. But what's really strange about this, and the reason why I want to do this differently than I have discussed it previously, is that heaven is used as bait. Heaven is used as bait within our own minds, and it's used as bait to our children. It's used as bait for others. Preachers, oh my God, they're trying to manipulate you constantly, aren't they? Well, if you don't do what I say, then you're not going to go to heaven. You're going to go to this other place, which is hell. If I run out of material, we'll call this episode Heaven and Hell. I almost feel like I just have to put them together now. Shit. I was so going to make this one word episode. I think it's very powerful to name the episodes one word, if possible. Unless the fun subjects about splicing DNA and stuff, but with aliens. So we'll call this episode Heaven and Hell. We'll just go as long as it takes. It's supposed to rain, but not for quite a while. It's like 76 degrees out. I feel like I'm in Florida because it's sort of totally overcast. It's nice. And it's not as humid as it could be. That's your weather update. So heaven. What's the most fundamental definition of heaven as defined by a Judeo-Christian person? Well, it's a place where you go. If you do everything right in this world, you go to heaven. And you are with God. If you're a Christian, you're with Jesus Christ. If you believe in Allah, you are with Allah. You're with whatever prophet, whatever deity you worshipped on earth. They are the commander-in-chief, if not the main concierge of heaven. Your ticket was purchased by the summation of your record on earth. They take everything you did on earth and they total it all up at the end. And you're either in the black, which means you have a positive cash flow, or you're in the red, meaning you are in debt. Red being fire. And that's when you start going to the other place. Now, varying religions have different versions of heaven and hell. The Mormons have 3 spherical celestial realms, they call them. You know, again, the top one is getting to be with God and Jesus. The middle one's just Jesus, and the bottom one is just everyone else. And then there's hell, of course, this 4th one. But when did a definition of heaven come around? Why would it have come around? I think it's interesting that when you talk to Native Americans about their vision of the afterlife, it is a homogeneous world with their elders who have died to become stars. You know, you look at the pharaohs of Egypt. They didn't really per se have a heaven. I mean, they sort of did, but they took their world with them. So they believed they had all the burdens and the benefits of earth, but they had them in heaven. And they could do it uninterrupted in heaven. And isn't that what it's all about? Any definition of heaven is about a place where you lose all of your aches and pains in this world. You lose all of your bills and your taxes. All that bullshit we have allowed to exist. I mean, we can't escape death. And we've got this sort of, again, this place called heaven. Now, what I keep mentioning, and this is what's kind of grown up to be this episode, is that when I really think back about every time anyone's ever certified a heaven to me, they have never been able to define it more than a few sentences. And those sentences are sort of duplicates of each other. The last person I dated who was ridiculously religious, who had never read the Bible one time. I mean, unbelievable how these people throw people out of their lives, which is sort of what happened to me in the end. They haven't read the Bible. They have no idea why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, if there's any type of Satanistic act, it would be something like that, right? But I asked her, I said, what's your definition of heaven? And she just relied on the fact and felt good about the fact to say, well, we don't know. It's just great. Okay. That's how far people think about what they're living their entire lives for. You know, I tell you, life is a bunch of experiences. You can either choose to have them or not have them. Right? And to choose not to have experiences because you have some sort of paradigm of loyalty in this world, I'm just going to tell you, it better be a good paradigm. A damn good paradigm. And defined to you to some degree, right? So some of you might be listening to this and you're going, well, dude, you're going to fail. You're going to fail to define heaven. You're absolutely correct. I'm going to fail. But you know what? I think the failure is real important. I think failing to define heaven is extremely important because that's self-evident in itself. If you've watched most of my episodes, you'll realize that one of my key frustrations in the world is that we never have a reward for someone that proves something not to exist. There's never a reward for a negative. There's only a reward for the positive, but sometimes it is really fucking hard to prove something that doesn't exist. It just is. If Stephen W. Hawking, instead of getting a bullshit PhD award or, pat on the back for his theory of the Big Bang, which would take about 60 seconds to dismantle. Instead, he gets an award for it, and it becomes the crowning achievement of the cosmology group and Cambridge University. He gets to hold Isaac Newton's position eventually because he's so smart. Now, what he should have received was a big fat accolade and his PhD for proving that it absolutely positively couldn't exist, and move on to the next thing. Whether or not he gets, Newton's position, I don't know. But it sure is convenient nowadays that the guy can't talk, and they could program him to say whatever the hell they want. He becomes like just a marionette, a puppet-controlled dude. There's no evidence that guy talks anymore. None. His wife, who would tell you whether or not that's something he would say, she's not around anymore. He's got a new wife. Doesn't know him that well. But that guy will talk about whether or not heaven exists. Some people have algorithms that try to prove that heaven exists. It blows me away. The gullible shit that we will buy. Now, what we're doing here is debating our own beliefs. That's it. I'm not going to tell you that I think it exists or doesn't exist. I'm just going to tell you that every definition I've personally ever heard, ever, merely calls out its name, and that's about all it does, right? In the Bible, they'll talk about ascending to heaven, being with the Father. All right. Let's talk about the whole thing here. So your typical definition of heaven is that you get to go up there and you don't know what's going to happen, but it's just great. It's just great. And a lot of people believe they're going to take their bodies with them because they're infantile childs who feel like they need their mortal coil with them. Hey, maybe we do get to keep something. The Mormons, boy, they can't let go of their bodies. Oh my God. They think God is like, George Burns or Charlton Heston. Not quite sure which one they believe, but he's definitely a white guy. He's up there walking around. They do actually believe he's physical. And they believe, well, because they have a hard time with metaphor, they believe made in his image means he's human. And hell, maybe he is. Interested to see what race he picks. Probably he's like pure red, horns on his head. He's like, sorry, just a family thing. But then you would have the desires of man would be essentially something you would satiate in heaven. Well, if you want to play music all day, then I guess that's what you'll do. If you want to eat all day, that's what you're going to do. Whatever you want to do. What I don't understand is if you're addicted to something like screwing, how do you do that? Even if it's your spouse is up there too. Or what if you get to heaven and your spouse isn't there yet? I don't know how that works. Then is heaven related to a temporal alignment, a temporal constraint? Is heaven going by my watch down here on earth? Seems hard to believe, right? Wouldn't it just be everyone's there because eventually everyone dies, and so you aren't in heaven without your spouse, your significant other, your children. Everyone's there all the time. There's no being in heaven without anyone because it's not linear. It's fourth dimensional. Why would it follow the clock of Earth? Wouldn't that be a pretty intense burden on Earth? On heaven from Earth? I sure would design it that way. If you ever get into the idea of that you believe that, spirits of people who have passed come back to help you out, which is definitely something that I think I have proven to myself multiple times. I don't know who's doing it or what, but definitely seems to be inspiration coming from different flavors of soul. It just feels like a different person with different talents and different ideas. But let's just say you are thinking that heaven is, and the spiritual realm is relegated to time. And maybe it is. Who knows if it exists, right? But you say one of your mentors, let's just say someone you admire, someone you've never met, passes on somewhere in the world. And you never got to meet him or what have you, but now you have access to them. They're your little Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so you can call out to them and say, hey, I would really appreciate your help and your inspiration, Maybe it's someone you just learned existed, Nikola Tesla, and you're an electrical engineer, and you're like, dude, could you just come down and kind of feed me some thoughts and nudges in the right direction? Obviously somebody nudged you, and maybe get some inspiration that way. But if you think about it, if the afterlife isn't three-dimensional with linear time as a fourth dimension, if it's really abstract time, then you can call on anyone, even yourself. It's like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. You can ask for whatever you need, and it's right there underneath the potted plant, you know. But now the real dilemma, and this is what's weird. This is going to sound corny as hell. This is just what young boys do. I was probably about 20, 21, and this girl at my work said she wanted to start a company and start placing ads in newspapers, and she said that she wanted me to be her partner in it because I was technical, and I could do all the work, and she would simply pay for the ads and stuff. And she was bringing me this. It was one of those scams back in the late 80s. It wasn't meant to be a scam, but we had booklets that somebody wanted. I can't even remember what the hell it was about, but she said, make a company name and let's make some ads and da-da-da-da. It was just, that's what the scams, the network marketing thing was back in the day, right? And so I went fishing in the dictionary to find a company name, and I found the word Nirvana. This is long before the band existed, as far as I know. And it was just an interesting word, and I read about it. But the definition in the dictionary was heaven or hell. And I was like, that's weird. How does one word mean both of those things? Because aren't they diabolically opposite of each other? Aren't they antithesis of each other? Well, it wasn't it took 20 more years for me to learn why it was called hell. And it was that the Buddhists had really nurtured up the definition of nirvana. And because they sit and they meditate and they think like we do, they've been doing that for thousands of years before this show ever existed. And they have this whole ascension tree of enlightenment. And if I had another life, I would go through the full ascension of being a Buddha. Buddhist. Maybe I'll take a year off, do a bunch of deep thoughts from up there. I just won't take an oath of silence. But they thought it through and they said, okay, if heaven does not have evil in it, and darkness in it, and choice, then it will be as close to a stateless world as possible, meaning, so just to kind of define what we're talking about here, when I say a state, I am talking about happiness as a state, sadness as a state, anger as a state, elation as a state, right? So in heaven, you are just constantly happy. That is always the definition. If you ever ask anyone, well, you're going to ever be upset in heaven? You ever going to cry in heaven? Only if I'm happy. You're as close to a singularity of emotion as you've ever been in your life. And what the Buddhists concluded very instantaneously was then that would be hell. When you're trapped, you don't go anywhere. When you're in jail, you don't go anywhere. You sit there. And as much as you might be able to come up with a little microcosm within your cell, imagining things to make yourself satiated, within your cell, you are confined. It is not a heaven by any stretch of the imagination. That's why imprisonment is a punishment. Why do parents ground their kids? To create prisons in their houses, to turn the house into a giant symbol and metaphor for prison, and parents are wardens, and you wonder why your kids rebel against you. So what is the most coveted thing that you would want in this universe? What is it that we like the most? It's not just being happy. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's being alive. Being alive is the most important thing that you want to have, to experience. So let's take a visit to the other place for a split second, because we're right here at this pivotal moment where I have suggested that just being alive is the most important thing. All right? I'm going to give you a choice. Eternal damnation as defined by man. A burning pit of this, burning pit of that, total have your eyes gouged out, whatever crazy, horrible imagery that the writers of Walking Dead will come up with. Or you don't exist. You simply vanish and poof away. Now, I've thought a little bit about this, and it's not as if I want to conduct this experiment personally. I don't think this place exists at all, and I'll tell you why in a few seconds here. But what I have discovered is that people who have been injured badly what we might call maimed. And they have pain every day. They have steel rods in their bodies. They just have bad backs. They have bad necks or whatever. When it first happens, and they have never experienced that pain before, it is the most frustrating, angering thing you've ever experienced in your life. Had a lady hit me at a stop sign in front of a cop station. Whatever. She wasn't paying attention to the stop sign that's always on. And I got a lateral whiplash. For a year, I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't get money for it. And then after, I probably could have gone back to get money for it, but it took me about 5 years to rehabilitate out of that through chiropractic care and stuff. I'm perfectly fine today. But I remember when my neck started throwing out about a year and a half later. And when you have a pinched nerve in your neck, I will tell you, it doesn't matter how big, tough, and strong you are, how many fucking tattoos you got on your body. You will be a whimpering child. Especially when it's right by your skull, by your consciousness, by your brainstem. It will humble you. And then when you can't stop it, it keeps happening every 3 or 4 months. You got to wear a neck brace. You absolutely can't go to work. Your brain works fine. You can do your job. But randomly throughout the day, the inflammation in your neck will pinch this nerve or in your back or whatever. For those of you who had that, you understand it all too much. But when it starts happening to you, you start wondering, Jesus, what if this little pinch feeling never went away? Wouldn't that be a little hell on earth? The answer is yes. But what starts happening is you start developing a point of origin for what the world really is, or where the world begins. If you had an eternity in hell, something tells me that the devil, as defined, doesn't really get off on that crap anyway. As far as I know, he wants you to come down and start foundations and run for presidents and kill human beings. I think that's what turns him on more than keeping you all preoccupied in some fiery pit. Spite the living. But I think that your entire origin point of existence, what is normality, would change. And burning and suffering would simply change. And that's what you would know as a basis of existence. Perhaps screaming and yelling. Well, why? I've been doing this for a long, long time. At some point, the thing that might hurt is being treated nicely. Who knows, right? But there has to be a differential inside the consciousness of your being for there to be anything there. And the funny thing about it is that hell requires you have a body. Doesn't it? Oh, you're going to take your human flesh with you. Even though it's down here in a hole being eaten up by a bunch of worms. Somehow when you go to hell, you're going to get your body back, and then we're going to just rip it apart, and somehow it gets regenerated like Christine's car fenders. Please. These mechanisms have been created to bait and create fear. Why does a sheep ever run into a barn? Because it's being freaked out, man. And it's a dumb as hell animal. That's why. It's not educated on what a dog bark is. I mean, you think after a while, come on. You know, I don't know how many years a sheep would have to be alive, but wouldn't you think after 4 or 5 seasons, the sheep would just look at that dog and go, whatever, bark all you want. But no, they're wired to be stupid from the day they're born to the day they die. Same thing with a chicken. You'd probably, only a koala bear and a panda and a sloth might be stupider than a chicken. The chickens are... The reason why you can cut a head off a chicken and it keeps running is because it doesn't use its brain to do anything anyway. Heaven and hell. So what are some alternative perspectives from the traditional man-made heaven and hell? Well, who says they have to exist? Who said that in the first place? How come ancient religions don't have any beliefs in that shit? You mean to tell me that the Aztecs and the Mayans believed in a heaven and a hell, but they sacrificed, supposedly, their people into fire pits at the top of pyramids? And I want you to understand that, I think I've said this in one episode a long time ago. This would be a slight digression, but it does have to do with people who believe they have previous knowledge of other cultures. The white man has to always be the smartest species on this planet in their mind. It's just a disease. And maybe coincidentally, we were the first to build a few things. I don't think we were at all. You have the pyramids that go back easily 35,000 years. I mean, they had iconic phonetic hieroglyphs 35,000 BC. We're way older. But the reason why they compress time is because it allows the white man to take their more recent accomplishments and push them just a few thousand years before everyone else. You know, Stonehenge has to be older than the pyramids of Giza. When there's over 125 pyramids that we can observe that we haven't dug out, we haven't looked in them, we don't know how they're created. There's, I think, 30 bent pyramids. I mean, it's probably a hell of a lot more, but the number just keeps going up. The Aztecs and the Mayans, well, they have pyramids all over South America. Some as big as mountains, but they're not allowed to acknowledge them. But what do they tell you about those Aztecs? They sacrifice. There's all these really kind of crude pictures of sacrificial ceremonies. But to my knowledge, there's no Mayan text or Aztec writing that says that they sacrifice people. Just these illustrations that could be drawn by anyone in the modern era. To do what? To demonize that culture, to make them seem savage and barbaric. I mean, haven't you seen Avatar? You just call them savages. That's what you do. And it makes you feel superior. Not you, but them. So alternatives to heaven. Let's go there first. Because I think that the need for hell simply disappears when you redefine what heaven is. We have this major oxymoron when it comes to the definition of a creator. Because the creator would be this ultimate source, this ultimate programmer that will create a heaven and a hell. Some inspirational mechanism for his children. And the idea is that you have to have an inspirational model to get the kids of the world to behave, right? I'm going to threaten you constantly. I'm going to threaten you with hell and damnation, and then I'm going to also bait you with this idea of heaven. Because at some point, I need something to inspire you. And I would call that an extremely flawed artificial intelligence program, if that's what we needed to behave. Now, what's funny is I am absolutely the byproduct of those two concepts. What's the alternative to baiting man with fictitious constructs like heaven and hell? Well, you'd have to hope that man becomes intelligent and has empathy and sympathy for each other, that we merely want people to feel good. Now, what's interesting is this. In this day and age, you have folks that understand that there are evil people with huge email chains to prove it. And then you have the rest of the people who are really, really good. And when you try to teach people who are really, really good about people who are really, really bad, or organizations made up of those people, they can't believe it. And they can't believe it because we have a human nature to be good. And so we can't conceive of evil thoughts, so we can't conceive of anyone else having an evil thought. And that is what we call massively naive. But at the same time, this is what I've been debating over the last year of my life here, being one of these guys that knows a lot of weird stuff, or studies a lot of stuff, a lot of potential truths, let's just say. The idea is it okay to have a bunch of people out there? Is it a good idea to have a bunch of people out there that can't believe in those negative things? And I have several of these friends. And I've now changed my opinion, and I think, yeah, I want a couple people out there, if not several people, dozens of people that can't believe that anything goes wrong in the world. Because eventually, all the bad news will come out. And when it comes out, they'll be able to go, oh, wow, you were right. That's crazy. The good news is it's fixed now because we exposed it. So we define our God in almost every single case as a non-wrathful, infinite-loving, infinitely patient God. Because to have wrath and have anger is to have ignorance. You're only angry when you're surprised. Don't break that rule. And then that person's looking at the kid or whatever, and they're they're a bull in a china shop, and of course they break something because they're a child. They're a child in an adult realm, and of course they may not physically be able to behave. They may not mentally be able to grasp things. And so it's an issue, right? That's not a God. That's a human. That's a human writing a story about God. So what happens to the definition of heaven and hell, the need for those two constructs, the whole purpose of it all, if you have, finally, for a fleeting second, a God that is actually infinitely intelligent and thus incapable of feeling wrath and anger? Thinking in punishment models is not what an infinitely brilliant being does. Because if an infinitely brilliant being creates a flawed creature, which is man, then they know they did. God would know that we are flawed, and therefore we are going to make mistakes, but that's the journey that we are on. That is the gift from God, is being able to make mistakes. And those mistakes are otherwise known as choices, right? And so to bait you, your whole existence, with this notion that there's this big Club Med in heaven, way up there in the sky with God, it is only accessible if you live your life damn near perfect, is absurd. Utterly and completely absurd. Whatever religion you believe, the truth of the matter is, very few people of the world have learned your religion. Muslim is the biggest religion on earth. But if you're a Christian, then it's a tiny sliver of what's happening on earth. And when they come and knock on your door and telling you if you don't do what they say, according to their little book, that you're not going to heaven, hey, there instantaneously becomes the majority of the world that won't go because they're not following that particular sect's version of what probably is some satanic book ritual coming out of a satanic organization called the Catholic Church, right? I'm referring to the heads of state that design a class structure that preach that man is equal, but treat their own hierarchy as if the Pope is a superhuman on earth, a guy that drives around a bulletproof car, as I always say, because he is afraid of dying. He's afraid of going to heaven. He's afraid of going wherever the hell a guy like that goes. The people who are Catholics, the people who are all of the followers of all these religions are good people. It's the 99.9% slice of humanity. We're all good. We are. Whether or not we're misguided or whatever, we're still good people. But I think we could find God without these institutions. Now, it's easy, and you'll hear me get caught up in this all the time. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that people that do bad things on earth are going to be punished. But now let's just say that there is one place, but there's an ecosystem. There's a recycling ecosystem to life. As I promise, we get into the afterlife and that sort of thing as a result of this. Because if you start questioning the existence of heaven and hell, you need to have an alternative theory. Where do we go then? Well, I think that God could be one of two things in my mind, if there is anything at all. So for those of you who are atheists, I doubt you're tuning in for very long, but if you're right, then we're just dust in the wind and we're done. All right, so the rest of this is just pure entertainment. But either God is a singular consciousness with his or her own thoughts, or God is a kind of a global collective of all spirits that exist in that realm. I personally don't feel like I contribute to the afterlife, but maybe I do. Maybe we all do. When I say me, I mean you and everybody, right? I know that my consciousness is fed into this world. So the more good thoughts I think, the more good thoughts you can think if you're by me. It's one of the cool upticks of the show, right? I'm saying uptick a lot lately. And pop. I noticed I said pop a lot lately. But we're all sort of swimming in this kind of sea of consciousness, and we're the little water molecules, right? So thinking good thoughts is a good thing. And that's why when they litter us with these stories of terror, and when they start war after war after war, America's in 7 theaters, man. We are not allowing our American way to bring the joyous feeling it is to be an American to the rest of the world. We are bringing a sort of hell on earth to the rest of the world because we continually buy the divide and conquer mechanisms. within our own borders. We bite into the race wars. We bite into, the race wars go way deeper than just black on white. There's a ton of Jew haters and stuff like that. It never ends. We hate the past. We fear the future, But if God is a singular being or a collective being of all of us, then it pretty much behaves exactly the same. It means well. But I'm always talking about recycling and, reincarnation. Now, this is just a hunch. There's a scientific side of it where you say energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be reconfigured. Now, maybe it diffuses. Maybe the consciousness of us diffuses. Now, we know that the electrons that this body's made out of, all of the Sigma 5 classifications of mass that I have in my body, it is going to disintegrate, right? When I'm gone, this face is gone, this body's gone, it's gone. But my soul, if I give it a slightly different classification of energy, it can go on way beyond this body. Because it's not affected by this body, and this body doesn't affect its form. This body does not affect its ability to coalesce and hang on to itself. So the consciousness that's controlling this body to speak to you right now, it's its own entity, completely unaffected by the body. The body is a proxy into it. That therefore, if you damage your body, and most atheists say, well, see, we can poke on the brain and you get your memories and it's a bunch of, see, it's just totally chemical bag. No. All right. If you take a piano, which is made of a bunch of interconnected kinetic wood pieces that bang a hammer on a chord inside the bowels of the piano. Now, if I were to say that the chords are your soul, but somebody tears up all the keys, takes a sledgehammer to the front of the piano, the chords are okay inside. It's just you can't play that part of the piano anymore because some jerk-off heard it. So when you bang your head and you get sick and you become maybe some form of mentally handicapped or something, that doesn't mean your soul's hurt. It just means your liaison to the soul has been damaged. Take a bunch of drugs and scare yourself up. Same thing, right? Now, we observe something that takes on the definition of gravity. What it is, some of us have ethereal wind theories. Some people have flat earth air pressure theories. Others have, I don't know what it is, theories. They define it as a phenomenon in Wikipedia. Jesus, not WikiLeaks. Guess where I've been looking lately. What if there's some form of unification in that other realm? Whatever your spirit's made out of, there's some wild unification that once it leaves the vessel, it becomes free and it travels through a current, towards the center of some center point to be redistributed. Maybe you take a break. Maybe you do. I'm just guessing. Maybe you choose when you're reborn. Shirley MacLaine talked about it a long time ago in the late 80s and early 90s, and I thought she was some far-out New Ager. The more I think about it, it's like what she said was you pick your reentry point. You pick what time of the century and what body and what being you want to be in, whether it be alien or human or whatever, and you live that life. And maybe the rule is that nothing can really mess with you too much. That's what you impose on yourself, not what the universe imposes on you. Now, I'm sure most of us want to break those rules every once in a while. But if that were the case, the idea starts to burn in your head of, where does punishment come in? What's the ultimate sin you can create in this world with common law? It's killing someone. Maybe that isn't the most horrible thing, but it is the most ultimate finite thing for us to understand. When you destroy someone's vessel, they have no hope of ever doing anything again. Somehow I suspect that torturing someone for a really long time is equally bad, but maybe that's not bad. Who knows what the rules are, but maybe through the sheer realization that we live forever, there are no sins. Maybe there are no sins. Isn't that crazy? Now, maybe it's simply that there are no sins on the spiritual side of things, and maybe that we elect to run our world with sins here on earth. We don't think everyone should steal. We don't think everyone should kill, etc. down the line, right? So within this realm, we get to run it however we want to run it, and it's a dynamic collective consciousness. Now let me give you this weird analogy, a realization, I should say. In the 1800s and before, it was extremely common globally for a guy in their 40s to marry like a 14-year-old girl and start having kids. Now, I had a girl in my junior high that literally left at 8th grade at 14, 15 years old or whatever. I think she's 14. And she went off and had kids with her husband that was like 16 or something. I mentioned her once before. I think she had 4 kids, and I met her later on, and she was the most utterly well-balanced woman I've ever met. She just knew she wanted to be a mom. Amazing, right? Now imagine, and believe me, I'm not trying to cut anyone a blank check, but this is what's so wild about the world. That went on for hundreds of years. Now believe me, I have a daughter, and I can't imagine my kid sleeping with a fucking adult at 14, right? And, the main thing is that a woman's body hasn't developed completely, right? She's not at her maximum height, and we'll let you fill in the blank there. But that was totally legal and totally the way it worked. As a matter of fact, families would plan to put their kids together so they could build up dynasties. It happens in the royalty level all the time, right? Prince Charles wanted to marry Camilla Bowles, but she didn't have the family line that the Windsor family, the Saxe-Gothberg family, wanted their son to marry. So they arranged for him to marry Princess Di because of her bloodline. Then he immediately pouted and said, whatever, I'll get her pregnant or however we're going to do this little insemination thing. But after that, I'm hanging out with Camilla, and you can just go screw yourself. And eventually Princess Di is going, geez, I wanted to get married and have a family and a husband and kids. And now I am the mistress in my own marriage? So she said, fuck you, man. And she started messing around. And they killed her. It was her fault that Prince Charles didn't want to marry her. She ends up losing her life. But look how pedophilia in the 1850s was, if we say 18 and younger or 17 and younger is pedophilia and statutory rape and all that stuff, then that was the way it was around the globe around 1850. Now, to some men's credit, they did document themselves, because sometimes they'd marry these kids really, really young, and they'd wait for them to get of age to have children. And then there are scientists that remind us, well, then when a girl starts menstruating, that is her sign that she can have kids. I would say if that's the case, then she should be hanging out with boys her own age, so their bodies are generally the same proportion, right? But isn't that interesting? We have to have a framework of what is sin and what is not sin to be able to give hell and heaven a definition. Well, what is a sin? Because what is heaven and hell? Heaven and hell is the reward or the punishment for not following following the laws and committing sins based on where you're from. I think that's fascinating. What if you went to a completely different world with a completely different circumference? They live a completely different number of years. Like the whole Vulcan or the elven mythical characters, fictional characters, they live a long time. They live hundreds and hundreds of years. All right, well, what would be their definition of pedophilia? What if being 14 and their world started to, really start around 60 years old, and you don't really become even a remote late teen until you're 120? Right? See how this gets really arbitrary? But let me throw at you a different definition of hell, which I have talked about in different episodes, but again, we're trying to pull it all into one container here. I think hell is what you make of your own life, based on your own feelings. Most of us believe, unless you are mentally handicapped, but even if you're mentally handicapped, usually you have a sense of this in the studies that I've seen and the people that I've heard interviewed. People know what's right and wrong. And I think that's fascinating. We know what's right and we know what's wrong. And so let's just say that you committed an injustice based on what you believe to be a right and wrong. You created suffering somewhere in your life, an individual, a group, and then you die. Your mortal coil dies, and your spirit is released. And you go up to the big place up there. And you sort of take your snapshot of your journey with you for a little while. Because if you lived forever, how much could you remember what you were before? You think that would be almost like a tormenting thought. And let's just say, for a split second, did you live 2 ideal, wonderful lives? So, you live a great life, you follow all the rules of your planet, you fall in love. Let's just say you're a guy, just to make it easy for me. You fall in love with a young lady, you are high school sweethearts or whatever. You grew up in the same village, there isn't a big city around, and you have kids. You have a wonderful life. And you go up to this universe and you pop out, and your whole idea is to stick with this person your whole life. You mate like birds, right? You're monogamous. But then you die. Your physical body dies, and it's in a different iteration than your wife. You don't die at the same time. But you have this love, and you have this yearning for that spirit. Well, if it's linear time, you're going to sit around and wait. For those people I know who work in hospice, well, they say that there are people around you when you die in our spiritual realm. Pretty interesting, right? But now you go up there and you chill out for a while. And maybe the game is to wait for your spouse to come over the other side, your significant other. And you guys keep going down together. And you keep finding each other. Wouldn't that get boring after a while? Wouldn't that be boring after a while? Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. But at some point, you come down and you switch people. You find a different person. You both kind of agree, well, I'll meet you here after it's all over, but let's try to find someone else. And eventually you amass this gigantic relationship with the universe, especially if you lived forever, and you will have dated everyone that ever existed if there's a finite number of spirits. But maybe there's an infinite number of spirits. But the idea that I'm trying to propose to you is this. I don't think you can stay in one place for your whole life, stateless. So I think that, a lot of us believe that it's like, okay, I'm going to manifest up a bunch of desires as a human being. Then I'm going to go to heaven. I'm going to live out those desires. All right. How long is that going to take? 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years? I guarantee after 10,000 years, you'd be done with anything you could have manifested and the sub-manifestations of those initial manifestations. Right? Well, I wanted to be a world champion ice skater, and then you get into ice skating, and you're like, oh my God, I became a coach after that, or I made a whole new sport. And you just keep going and going until you exhaust all those arteries. But it's going to come from the perspective of your body and your soul working together, not from your spirit all by itself. You see how complicated this gets? You can see why people define heaven as a very basic thing, because it relieves them of any tension and any need and responsibility to explain what's really going on here. And we don't really need to figure this out. We really don't. Does it bring me comfort if I can talk myself out of a hell? Well, he sounds worried about that place. Maybe. I think that the most terrifying concept, which isn't that terrifying, but it should be probably, would be one of forever. Any paradigm that has forever as a definition to it. Heaven forever, hell forever, life forever. That's a really long time. Which is why I think mathematically, if you want to really talk about consciousness going insane, either you become this sort of guy in a straitjacket in some room talking to yourself, because why talk to anyone else? You've already talked to everyone else. You've already said everything you could possibly say. You have done everything you could possibly do, every career, every sexual act you could possibly do, every amount of kids you could possibly have, being a kid, being a parent, believing in magic, all that stuff. You have eventually exhausted all that can be done. Now, mathematically, someone might argue with me, well, it's infinite, man. There's always something else you haven't done. Hell, maybe that's right. But I think you have to take form in order to experience things. And hey, maybe there's a huge spiritual playground up there. There's a spiritual Disneyland up there. We can hope, right? But I have to say, being a businessman in my life, I know that having a goal, not having it all, having a goal and getting that goal and getting that, that finite paycheck for my deed, and going through the struggle and going for, having hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank one day and being on unemployment the next day and then being a millionaire the next day. Those are fun stages, trust me. Those are fun stages, and the last thing you want is to be walking up to heaven and you have an infinite bank account to do anything that you want. That's not fun. It may be fun for a little while, but for any of you who have gotten into a video game and you flip on all the cheats and you're in God mode and you're running around and one bullet kills a boss. And so we need choice. We need trial and error. We need pressure. I think, and this is not my epiphany, it's been said several times by many brilliant people, that without evil, as defined by your perception, without evil, there is no good. Isn't that a weird thing, a paradox that we have to manufacture? I recently saw a series of videos on Satanism, because I'm trying to prep up for my redo of the Satan video. And there was a gentleman in New York City, and he had said that his father was a Satan worshiper, and then he raised him as a Satan worshiper. This guy's pretty famous. I can't remember his name. But he did an interview in his living room, and he wholeheartedly believed that he was an agent of Satan, that Satan would come into the room with him, and that he said that there was principalities. There was, there were like regional agents of the devil all over the world, and that he would, if he wanted you dead and you lived in Toledo, Ohio, he would contact the devil's minion and the principality who ran that region, and he would set the curse over to that guy, and then that person would be dead. And based on your faith in God, you would be protected by this kind of stuff. And you couldn't kill certain people because they had good faith in God, and even the devil himself would not touch certain people. And it was interesting because it was completely man-made out of Christianity. Very fascinating. But then he had a moment of salvation where he says he was sent to hell, and he kept seeing the cross and Jesus down there, and that he was saved by Christ. And believe me, this dude believes everything he saw. And he wept at the end of this documentary as he explained being saved by Christ. And to him, he was the most evil person that had ever lived. And he said that Christ saved me. And because he saved me, he'll save you too. And so, you want to look at that and give it as much sympathy and belief as you possibly can, because he's had this experience for real. The guy's weeping, right? He's a tough guy. But one of the things that strikes me is probably the case. I do believe we have a very close relationship with the universe. You can call it God. I call it God. I think there's some evidence that various very specific spirits exist and participate in our lives at various times, especially if we ask for that assistance. It's not because I'm weak, just because it's something I've tried and it just seems to provide a feedback. And if it has any other definition of how it works, then fine. That definition is true, but the way I access it is through the metaphor of spirits and a God. For this guy, the metaphor of being saved was through a cross and a fictional character, Jesus Christ. Because it would seem, because the reason why I say fictional is because there's plenty of people who have had the same exact experience and don't believe Jesus is real, and their deity was the one that saved them. So we can't take away any person's experience and say it didn't happen. It happened to them exactly how they needed it to happen to them. The symbol that they would believe is the one that they saw. We don't need to take that away from them and tell them that they're stupid or whatever, or gullible. No. It probably happened to that guy, exactly the way he said. But if he had worshipped Winnie the Pooh, I guarantee you Winnie the Pooh would be the one to save him. And there's really nothing wrong with that, because they have an equal power. Let's just say, let me make a finer point on this. Him seeing Jesus Christ and me believing that he didn't exist. If you were to ask God to come down to you and talk to you, like supposedly he just walked the earth back in the past, right? And all those people got the accolades for believing in God when they actually met him, and we have a planet that's being run by some of the most evil people on planet Earth, and we're supposed to have faith in God. We're on level 1 million, and the disciples were on level 0. Okay. But if God were to come down, what would be the first question God would have to answer based on your behalf? He would, or she would have to say, well, what would this individual recognize as God? What's the symbol of God for them? Well, what would an atheist see? If an atheist asks, hey, God, if you exist, come on down and prove it to me because I can't believe in you without you proving yourself to me. All right. So is God going to come down looking like Jesus Christ? Probably not. Because why would God want to move into the mind of an atheist, a fictional character, and bonify that inside of an atheist? Probably wouldn't. I actually don't know what God would look like to an atheist. In the movie Oh God, with John Denver and George Burns, it was George Burns, the actor, came down smoking a cigar, talking to John Denver, and John Denver didn't have any belief in God at the time. It's really a sweet, sweet movie. My first date at 9 years old, I went with a girl to see Oh God in Derby, Kansas. Pretty funny. So this individual had his closest point to believing in God and envisioning God was that he believed he was worshiping Satan. And, we don't know if there's a band of guys on the other side, Gabriel, Satan, or whatever, that is torturing all the rest of us, and maybe that does exist. Who knows? Maybe God allows spirits on the other side to be little bastards. Maybe he realizes that needs to exist in order to create goodness. Maybe they're assigned to do that, like I said in the other episode. But for him, the only equal vision that would represent good as opposed to the one that he believes, which is Satan, was Jesus Christ. He is the opposite of the paradigm that this guy was worshiping. When the agents of either side might be simply generic. They're not Christ. It's not Satan. But now think about it. As much as I might bust someone's chops for believing in Jesus, which I don't, let's say I got a friend, and I got plenty of them that believe in Jesus Christ, being the Son of God, died for our sins, all that stuff. Well, when it really comes down to it, I think they're worshiping the same exact being that I'm worshiping, or paying homage to, or saying thanks to, or acknowledging. And think about it for a split second. There's an Aborigine in Australia before the modern world showed up to dump all of its prisoners who were against the monarchy of Europe on this island. I want my Australian friends to understand that if you ever felt guilty of being the byproduct of a penal colony, and some of your bloodlines don't, of course, but if you are the byproduct of that penal colony, I would say that you're probably heroes of Europe. You simply didn't want to buy the bullshit in Europe. Why you guys still worship the Queen there, I don't know. Why you answer to Europe, I don't know. Because you shouldn't. You should be your own sovereign group of folks. Because you have the genetic strand that Americans have, which is Queen, King, go screw yourself, and you got shipped off because you were a dissident. That is something to be proud of. But let's take an Aborigine, way before that ever happened. And then let's take an Asian up in the Pacific Rim, Native American, a pygmy, an African black man, an Arab, and perhaps an albino white guy somewhere in Europe. And they all want to find God. They feel this mysterious nature when they look at the stars, and they're all just trying to get to the trying to get to the top, trying to get the bottom of the evidence, but the top of the mountain when it comes to who put us here, who made all this stuff, right? Now, what are the odds that they're all going to guess the right thing? Seriously. Forget the Romans creating the story of Christ to save their empire, to get people to tax themselves. Forget about the 900 years of inquisitions to punish and murder and kill people who didn't buy into the paradigm that was keeping Rome from falling. Forget about all that. You're just living in a peaceful world trying to find your creator. what are the odds that you're all going to come up with the right one? Unless God intervenes, removing choice, and pushes his son in your face, or himself in your face, or his daughter in your face. The odds are astronomically against, right? For those of you who want to believe in creationism, well, the same absurdity that you are arguing against something from nothing is the same absurdity you have to apply to man finding the same perfectly accurate vision of God without God coming down and placing that perfect truth in front of them. And so if you hang on to Christianity, the problem you run into, and I mean any religion really, but if you hang on to whatever organized religion paradigm that you believe in, the problem is that you're negating everyone else's fairness clause. If you say, well, no, it's Jesus Christ for sure. Oh, no, it's Buddha. It's something else, right? Allah. The problem with that is that you are essentially trying to solve your own problem, which is fine, but you're excluding the rest of the world, which is the majority of the world. All of South America, all of Australia. Native Americans who weren't discovered by Europe for quite a while. The Asians that go their completely different direction. The Hindus, the Africans, the Arabs, right? If your God is who you think your God is, your God would never behave like this. He would never cede just one small clique of man and say, well, for now, you're the ones that are saved. And everyone else, well, they're just going to have to come on board or else. There's all these excuses from religious institutions as to how come people aren't going to go to hell because they just haven't received the message, or they all have received the message through some ethereal transmission of their genetics. But you might say, well, then, I think the first thing is that you feel like you need to have salvation. This idea of original sin, right? Where did that come from? That came out of the serpent's mouth, man. If you want to believe any part of the Bible, it's a serpent talking to you in the first chapter, the first scene. Sets the whole thing in motion. How fitting would be a deception made by man, hidden in a snake, a serpent on a tree. I'm going to feed you a line of crap, and then I'm going to guilt every single human being that reads this book and believes it into believing in original sin that mandates a salvation through killing a lamb, through worshiping Christ. Lord, if you don't believe it, there's a fire and brimstone for you. Fire and brimstone doesn't sound very godlike. It sounds pretty manlike. But what if we figure it out? What if we figure it all out? Whatever it is, what if we figure it out? And as a planet of Earth, through hundreds and hundreds of years of experimenting, we throw out all these evil folks. We develop amazing universities, which, regardless of what language you speak or what race you are, we all homogenize and harmonize our thinking into believing that, one, we should be good to each other. So there's no more sin anymore. There's nobody breaks the law at all. We just managed to get there. Maybe it's a few thousand, 10,000, million years ahead, but we get there. And the whole world is good. We have struggles because we have goals. We want to learn how to do things we don't know how to do, and because we only live 100 years, if we're immaculately healthy, we can only do so many professions. Hell, even if you believe we could achieve 1,000 years of life through living super healthy, it doesn't matter. You couldn't in 1,000 years do every career that you'd want to do, every career that exists. You couldn't. So you're only going to get a finite, tiny slice of what's available on this planet to begin with. But let's just say you live in this euphoric utopia. Well, then the belief in hell would just simply disappear, right? Or would we recreate hell to say, well, if you don't have enough careers, you're going to go to hell? I doubt it. But say that we live in this weird state where we've managed to become non-aggressive. There's no more guns. There's no more wars. We just forbid it completely. What happens then? What happens then? Does someone create sin intentionally? Do a bunch of smart people get together and go, okay, folks, we're going to make a game called Running Man that's going to be horrendous. But what we're going to do is really get the this recessed chemical called testosterone going, and maybe some evil dopamine charges going. And you're going to go into this game that's horrendous, and you're going to pop out, and you're going to through this emotional arc. You're going to feel this elation at the end. Now, you could get plenty of excitement out of a nice world. Drive a motorcycle 200 miles an hour, and believe me, you'll have some testosterone and adrenaline in you at the end. Maybe what we're living in right now is as good as it gets. And because we continually come back, because we can't die, I'm hoping that there is a relief valve, some plateau where we can go chill out and relax after this is over, sort of a vacation of sorts. But that's just me imposing that as a will to relax. Isn't it interesting how we come back as children? In most cases, our parents take care of us. We don't have any bills. And we kind of just goof off for 5 years before we end up going to school. And school's pretty easy at the beginning. Doesn't really get challenging to about 7th grade. Eventually, we desire the rite of passage to become an adult. Anyway, it's starting to rain on me right now. I think you feel me. Remember to subscribe and like. Give me your comments. This is a bunch of good stuff. I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Take care of yourself and someone else. Over now.